Good morning, nuts and bolts listeners. Here we are. Another Friday is upon us. Hearty welcome to today's session where we are going to talk about observing and establishing your blind spots, something that is very difficult for leaders and business owners. But just as a reminder, if you do miss the live streaming, you can always go back to listen to it on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. So, hearty welcome. Today, we're going to talk about blind spots. So, visualize this. You're driving on the road, for those who do drive, and you want to change lanes. So either you do look, depending on which country you reside in, but from the country that I live in, South Africa, you would start looking at the right, and you would then change lanes. However, suddenly you hear this car hooting behind you, and you get such a fright, and you look again, and here's this car in that lane, and you just look to the right, and you totally miss them. You didn't see them. They were in that blind spot that your side mirror was not able to see. So that's one scenario. Or the other one is that you just change lanes, perhaps thinking that or feeling that there is nobody there, and there isn't. And that's often where accidents do happen. So in driving, we very often know what it feels like to have blind spots and to see them. But how does that relate to real life? And I think the story I want to share with you is that we are all too well familiar with what our weaknesses are. Uh, Personally, not a word that I am very fond of, but it is what we very often refer to as weaknesses, areas that we see as uh, skills or competencies or capabilities that we need to improve on. And unfortunately, society and our education system and the whole way we have been raised has always been on focusing on what you are not good at and what your weaknesses are and how to improve them. However, blind spots are different to weaknesses because very often when it comes to weaknesses, you can name them, you can list them. You most probably can write a whole A4 page of what you are not good at. The difference is with a blind spot is that you are very often blinded to it. You are not aware of it. So it doesn't even appear in your radar or peripheral area to go, this is something I should be working on or improving on. So what you don't know, you can't really put energy and focus on. However, how do you find out what your blind spot is? And in organizations, we often do performance appraisals, reviews, evaluations, whatever word you want to give this. And we take our employees and give them an evaluation of the work that they have done over a certain time period, 3 months, 6 months, a month, the time frame doesn't matter. And then we give them feedback on what they are really doing exceptionally well in and where there is room for improvement. So that happens very, very regularly in organizations with the goal of increasing productivity and performance, and also with the second component of wanting to grow the individual. However, as you go up in an organization, as you climb up the career ladder, these performance reviews change because you don't have them that often anymore. And if you do, it's only with your leader or your boss or senior line management. So that's one person. Some organizations perform 360 degrees reviews, which is where the leader then gets reviewed both from the top level, people on their same level that they work with, so their peers, and then their teams that they are managing. So hence they're getting feedback from 3 different sources. But the challenges with 360-degree assessments is twofold. A, they are exceptionally time consuming. They take quite a lot of time and effort to put together. So that would then result that organizations only do them once a year or every 6 months. And secondly, there is always a big question mark around confidentiality and disclosure. So, how much of the information is disclosed to the leader? Is it totally anonymous? And is there any room for the leader to establish, guess who said what? Because then that creates a totally different dimension. Hence, as you go up in your career, feedback becomes a little scarcer. People are hesitant to give you honest, candid feedback. And without feedback, how do we possibly grow and develop? So the biggest challenge is that leaders often don't know what their blind spots are because nobody makes them aware of that. Nobody has the courage often to tell them. And if they do, they go, as I say, they only get it from their boss down. Unless they do a 360, they might get a little bit more, but the feedback becomes a lot less. I mean, just think about it. Who gives the CEO of an organization feedback? And it's most probably the board of directors, but they do not see that the CEO in their daily interaction. They might just see the outcomes or the strategy that they've developed. So again, the feedback is skewed. So how does the CEO know what their blind spots are? I recently had a coaching client who came to coaching. And when a person comes to coaching, we always look at where are you now and where do you want to be in 3 months or 6 months? What are the areas you've identified that you would like to grow and develop in? And the areas can range. I mean, they're vast and they're obviously personal for each individual. And this individual had no areas to grow and develop in. Couldn't articulate anything. For this lady, she was in a sweet spot. She was leading perfectly. She was receiving no complaints from her team. She was being praised by her leader. So she was saying, well, I'm not quite sure what we're going to work on. I really actually don't know what we're going to do for the next 3 months. So that was an interesting challenge. How do you grow somebody if they cannot identify anything that they want to work in? So the challenge was on how do we find out what her blind spots are. She had received feedback on a 360. She had gotten good results on those. There was nothing that was identified for her to be working on. So I gave her a challenge. And the challenge that I gave her, obviously, which she had the right to decline, was to go and speak to 6 people within her organization. 2 people above her, 2 people on the same level of her, so peers, and 2 people in her team. And ask them, what are areas that perhaps you feel I can do better? Because what I was trying to establish for her was, when it comes to blind spots, is often our intent is honorable and good, and it comes from our dearest heart, but what is perceived by others is not the same. And I wanted to establish what was her intent sometimes and how are others perceiving her, and the gap would have been the blind spots. So she went and reluctantly, but she did do the exercise over time and ask the people, so what are things that you feel I could be different, or how do I come across sometimes in certain situation? So she phrased the questions in her own way that wasn't very scripted because it had to be also a natural conversation. And when I met her, I think the activity had to run for a 3 week period. When I then met her again in 3 weeks' time, she was quite surprised because there were items that her team and her peers and her manager made her aware of on her behavior that was not always her intent. And it is often the case. So you might want to come across as friendly or inviting the team for ideas or collaboration or um, brainstorming or whatever the topic is. However, your body language, your tone of voice, or your whole demeanor or your action behind it is different. So you are sending very mixed signal. As I say, your intent is meant very well and that you feel like you're supporting the team, but sometimes the way we do things is totally different. And that's exactly what I'm talking about with blind spots. We often think we are doing something nice and honorable and supportive, but the other person does not feel the same. And unfortunately, these situations where these blind spots appear, they stick in people's minds and they make an opinion of you and they are grooved into their head and they cannot so quickly undo that. So, hence, it's a bias that they think about you. And a blind spot can be negative or positive. So, it could be a blind spot that you possibly say yes to everything. So, you are the go to person to say, to to attract everything that says yes to, or have all the tasks executed because you are extremely efficient or effective. And so there are different ways of really establishing your blind spots. And like I alluded to it earlier, when you're driving in a car, you very seldom see them. And if you do, it's in the last minute. So it's talking to people about how do you actually perceive me. So when I'm managing or chairing or leading a meeting, what's the perception you get about me? And you might want to explore that because it's not maybe how you want to come across. And the same happens in different situations when you are perhaps presenting something or sending an email. We might want to send it with our deepest intent, but the other person is perceiving it as the language to be quite perhaps harsh, short, and to the point. So it's very often asking people, how do you perceive me or how do I come across? Because we, let's be honest, all think we're perfect and there's not sometimes always things or areas to grow on and that we're doing things very well. But if we don't ask people, especially if we are in senior positions or business owners, we do need that feedback. And as business owners, we might not have a big team to lead, but you can ask your customers um, or even your suppliers, what is the perception you are getting when you're engaging with me, so that you become aware that, oh, that was really not my intent to come across like that. My intent was something totally different. So go out there and perhaps just ask people, and people are reluctant obviously to share sometimes information like that because they think it's criticizing you, but you've got to phrase it in a certain way that you are open to taking their comments and that it's not criticism. You really want to know how you come across um, during certain situations. And I'll give you a personal example. I mean, my intent when I coach is to really acutely listen to the person. So to listen with my ears, my eyes, my gut, and really just absorb the person's conversation, their tone, their language, what they're saying and what they're not saying. And I very often, as as a a way of showing my level of listening and engagement, would lean quite forward into the camera to express I'm right here. And my mentor then gave me feedback on that and said, Kirsten, I understand your intent, but for the other person sitting on the other end of this camera or the digital Zoom meeting is feeling that's quite perhaps in their space, because you are a little bit in their space and you might be a little bit too close for them. So you can do the same, but just sit back and relax and engage in with it that way. And that was a blind spot. I hadn't seen that because my intent was really to listen very acutely. So I valued that feedback, to really constrain myself with where I put my hands, what I do with my hands when I'm coaching, and sit back and have an open demeanor versus being in this coach's face. So that is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And that was a small thing, but sometimes it's words we say, behaviors that we do. Yeah, it's little nuances, but for people, it makes a big difference, because they'll either make a decision to, oh, let's go there, let's not ask there, let's not do that. And you need to know what they are. So I hope that perhaps helped you on your blind spots and understanding what they really are. And trust me, we all have them. We all have blind spots. And we do need each other to highlight them. So I guess there's a responsibility on leaders as well as employees to identify blind spots. The first one is for the leaders to ask with all the people that they engage with and say, how do I come across? And is that how I intend to come across? I mean, is that how do you perceive me? I guess is the word. And get feedback from that, and ask a handful of people that you feel comfortable with, and get an answer. And people where you know you'll get a truthful, candid answer, and then take it as it is. Remember, it's their perception, and then work with it. They are your mirror. So engage it with that, and take it with that kind of kindness and humbleness, and gratitude of receiving that gift. Otherwise, you're just going to carry on. And the second one is for employees to have the courage and the permission to be able to voice that to their leaders and amongst themselves. Because if we take the principle of that we all want to grow and learn, we are all part of that journey and responsible for it. Yes, so learning can happen through courses and podcasts and all that additional training, but it also helps when people give you feedback live, or when you're actually performing, if I could call that, in your daily activities. So both leaders have to ask and employees have to have the courage to give. As I say, we all have blind spots. They are not something nobody has. It's just being gracious about them and looking what they are. And the more you explore them, the more you are able to grow and develop and realize, oh, this is how I'm coming across again. Oh, this is what I slip into, and then adjusting it. Because with that, we just grow in our level of confidence, and whatever we do impacts others, because as leaders, we are huge in negotiating, influencing others, and have an impact in their lives. So it is important for us to know what they are. So, nuts and bolts, listeners, I hope this helped you on the topic of blind spots, and may you have the courage to ask a few people what your blind spots are and how you come across, so that you are able to work on something. But whatever you do, be kind and gentle on yourself. It's always a process. Have a phenomenal Friday, and I look forward to seeing you next week where we'll have a guest speaker. Take good care, and thank you so much for tuning in. Bye bye.